Okay, great. Thanks to everyone that showed up to the session today and to those listening to the recording later. Hi, my name's Odette. I'm the campus librarian in Perth, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the basics for APA referencing. This is catered to the NATP students, just because that's a first semester unit, and usually there's a lot of new students coming into assignments and referencing for the first time, but it is applicable to anyone new to referencing. So if you aren't part of that cohort, this will probably still be very relevant. I'm going to start with a very exciting PowerPoint presentation and just jump straight into it. And there will be like a small demonstration at the end of where to find resources to help with your referencing. So don't feel like you have to remember everything that I talk about in this session. This is a really big, comprehensive referencing webinar, and it's going to be a lot of information. Really, the purpose of this and what I hope that you take away from this is just a general idea of when you need to reference and how to start building that, because it's one of those things that it will get easier and easier as time goes on and the more practice you get. But at the beginning, it can be like, okay, not only do I have to read my class content and understand the core concepts, I also have to do my assignments, I have to research them, and now I have to reference them. And I recognize it's a lot, but hopefully this session just gives you the support you need to get started. And I'll show you where you can go for more support and more resources through the library. So yeah, this session is essentially just going to cover what is referencing, why is it important, and just get you thinking about the basic building blocks you need to reference your assignments. So starting off, I'm just going to touch on plagiarism very briefly because it is all tied in together. So I'm sure that everybody's aware at least of the concept of plagiarism, and essentially a way to avoid plagiarism is to make sure that you're paraphrasing and referencing correctly. Like really, that's sort of like the best thing that you can do to avoid plagiarizing another person's work, which is essentially just taking someone else's work and displaying it as your own. And that also includes not referencing it properly. So even if you don't mean to, you were just using a textbook, you didn't realize that you had to include a reference, that's still technically plagiarism because you haven't properly attributed the original author. So why do we need to reference? First of all, it is the law. Copyright does apply to every created work, and presenting that work as your own is technically breaching copyright of that work. Also, the people that do put in the time and the effort to create your textbooks, to do research in clinical trials and publish journal articles, that takes so much time and so much effort, and they do deserve the recognition for that. So it's essentially just giving proper attribution to the people that put in the time and effort to make these things. And thirdly, and probably the most, I guess, relevant to your actual sort of like study, is it demonstrates to your markers that you can not only find the resources that you need to find, but understand them and reference them properly. So that's essentially what you're being marked on when you're being marked on your assignments. Right. So when do I need to reference? So as soon as you cite an idea or piece of information from somebody else's work, you need to reference it. So you'll find that if you're thinking that's going to be all of my assignment, yes, absolutely. And I will be talking a little bit about paraphrasing, which is essentially the way that you incorporate that into your assignments in a way that is academically strong and properly attributing the original author. So essentially this includes direct quotes, paraphrases, like I said, I'll go into that a little bit more, statistics, pictures, images, tables, graphs, and controversial facts or opinions that you might want to cite a source. Even if you're citing it as like, this is a controversial thing, it's probably good to find a resource that discusses that. Moving through. So yeah, when do you reference? As soon as you cite another source. And a good thing to note at this point is that even if it's the same source that you're using more than once, you need to provide a reference at each point a new idea or piece of information is introduced. So if you're referencing a chapter of your textbook, that chapter is going to cover, you know, a range of different ideas and a range of pieces of information, and you need to be citing that when those pieces of information come in. So sometimes a paraphrase can expand over a couple of sentences if it's very clear that that's explaining that idea, but then you move on and discuss something else. You still need to reference both of those, even if it's from the same place, which the more that you do it, like I said, practice, it just becomes a little bit more intuitive and you get a little bit more confident with your academic writing. But paraphrasing is something that is a really essential skill to get your head around now, because it will make doing your bigger assignments later on in the semester so much easier. What's the difference? Like, what is paraphrasing and what's direct quoting? So, obviously a direct quote, like we can see in this little example under here, is a verbatim replication of the content. So a word for word replication of the content. So this is in quote marks. So you can see that that denotes that this is exactly as it appears in the text. And then we include the authors or the author or authors, the date of publication, and the page number. So for direct quotes, we include page numbers. For paraphrasing, which is these two examples here, we don't. So paraphrasing is actually sort of easier because you don't have to include the page number. You can if you want to, but it's not essential. So a lot of the time when students are being mindful of word count, it's a better option anyway. So paraphrasing is essentially discussing the content in your own words. It's reading some text, understanding it, and then discussing it in a way that is your own language. We still, like I said, need to cite where that information came from, because the ideas and the information didn't just appear in your head, it came from somewhere. So referencing is essentially making it clear where that information came from. And a lot of the time, I feel like students can get really like stressed about, when do I need to reference? Is this enough? Is this too much? Is this not enough? And really the point of referencing is to make it as clear where the content is coming from as possible. So whatever that looks like, and you know, you can sort of like feel what that looks like, that's that's the way to go forward. So balancing paraphrasing and direct quotations, no more than 10% of your assignments should be direct quotes. That's just the copyright rule as well. Like anything over 10% is breaching of copyright, but it's also best practice. So the majority of your work should be paraphrasing. And I know it sort of feels like you want to be including direct quotes because you can show to your markers, like I found exactly the wording that, you know, displays my point. But actually what is preferable is to find that point, understand it enough to discuss it in your own words, because that's showing your markers and your lecturers that you're demonstrating that you understand the content enough to discuss it yourself, and that's essentially what you're being marked on. So how do we actually do that? What does that look like? So this is a little step-by-step that is a good place to start. It will definitely become more intuitive as you get more confident with writing assignments. But essentially, you read the passage that you want to use. You take a second to think about the content and the ideas discussed and what that means. This is also you learning the content as well. So it is sort of, essential for your own learning. And then write down how you would explain that passage to another student studying the same topic. That usually keeps you at sort of like the level that you need to be, while not taking on some of the language that the original source has. I feel like sometimes, I know that I would do it when I was studying. I'd read a chapter of my textbook or a journal article, and you can't help but sort of take on the kind of writing style that source uses by not looking at that source again. So reading it, thinking about it, and then writing out in your own words without looking at it again sort of removes you from speaking too closely to the original source and not changing the wording enough for it to be a proper paraphrase. And this is essentially how you avoid plagiarism as well. So making sure that your discussion is different from the original source ensures that you're not plagiarizing the work. And like I said, it means that you also learn it, which is great. So what does that look like? So this is a direct quote. In conservative heteronormative cultures, it is assumed that gender is unchangeable, is an unchangeable binary and always consistent with anatomical sex. In reality, however, there is a wide variety of both sex and gender. So this is our point that we're trying to make, and this is what it looks like in a direct quote. We have our quotation marks here. We also, in brackets afterwards, have our author surname, a comma, the date of publication, a comma, P dot to denote page, and the page that it came from with closed brackets. So that's how a direct quote would look. This is an example of a paraphrase that isn't quite different enough. So in conservative heteronormative cultures, gender is assumed to be unchangeable and directly correlating with anatomical sex. However, both sex and gender exist in a wide variety. Technically, it's not verbatim. It's not as the direct quote is, but just by highlighting it, you can see that the language the language used is far too similar to the original source for it to be a proper paraphrase, and you are bordering on plagiarism territory. This is an example of a proper paraphrase. So this is, again, the direct quote up the top here. Contrary to ideologies perpetrated by conservative heteronormativity, sex and gender exist outside of a binary constraint. Both feminine and masculine presentations are social constructs that have no real meaning beyond the social rule, and in nature, the presentation of female and male sex traits often blurs. So we're still making the same point, and there is still some language that we sort of need to use. Conservative heteronormative, you can see that that appears in this paraphrase as well. And that's fine. Like sometimes there are just words and names for things that are essential to the understanding. You'll find that particularly in the biology units, like sometimes, you can only use the medical terms for things. There's not really a way that you can sort of paraphrase around it. An example I like to think of that makes me laugh is the quote, "Big brother is watching you," has been paraphrased as "large sibling is observing you." Doesn't work. It's not the same, and sort of defeats the purpose of the reference anyway. So like I said, as you get more confident with your academic writing, which we do have Studiosity, which is in your LMS, and so library really helps with referencing. Studiosity helps with like paragraph structure and writing style and stuff like that. You can go to them for support as well when you're first starting out to get your head around it. But the more that you do it, the more intuitive it will become. And yeah, essentially you'll start to do this just intuitively, and you'll find your own kind of academic writing style as you go along. So this is an example. This table is actually directly from the APA 7 like printed manual that the library has created. So you can look at it in this slide. It's also available on the web as well. And this is just a nice little breakdown of what it looks like to include in-text citations. So we sort of covered when we need to include the in-text citations, and you can see from these examples the kind of information that we need to be capturing. Essentially, the two things that you need to remember: the author and the date of publication. Those are the two key pieces of information we need to be capturing for our paraphrasing. This looks a little bit different depending on how many authors we have and the kind of author we have, but it's always the same. It's always the author or authors and the date of publication or the last updated date if it's a website. Those are the two. So on this little list here, it sort of just shows the difference between what that would look like depending on how many authors we have. If we have one author, it's super simple. All we have to do is include the author surname, a comma, and the date of publication in brackets. And you can see that's exactly what I've done on this slide here. We have the author, a comma, the date of publication in brackets at the end of my paraphrase. So that's probably the easiest way to do it. But you can also work this information into the sentence as well. I think I have it on a previous example on this slide. So these are sort of the two ways that you can paraphrase. You can either include the author information at the end with the date in brackets, absolutely fine, or you can work it into the text as well, which is what I've done here. Starting the sentence with as outlined by Tortora et al. This text has more than 3 authors. So rather than list, I think this book has like 10 different authors. Rather than having to list all of the authors, we just include this et al, which is essentially just denoting that there are more authors in here, but it would be very clunky and also completely waste word count to include all of them. And then the date of publication. So this is also an absolutely fine way to incorporate that reference into your assignment. No one of these two ways are more correct than the other. It's just personal preference. I find that a lot of students to start with do just include it at the end of the paraphrase in brackets. Absolutely fine. And then as they get more confident with their writing, they start to play around with incorporating it into the sentence as a narrative citation. Let me go back to my slide. So that's one author, just author name, comma, date of publication in brackets. If there's two authors, again, pretty easy. This example here, we just include both author names with an ampersand, this little and symbol, a comma, and the date of publication all in brackets. Nice and easy. And then, like I said in that tutorial example, if you have 3 or more, you just include the first author name, et al., to denote that there are more authors in here. But for example, like this one has 3 authors, this one here has over 21 authors. We still just include et al. To say there are more people in here, but it's not very, the academic writing would really suffer if we included like 10 different author names in every single reference, not to mention our word count. So those are the sort of only like little tricky rules. 1, just include 1. 2, include both of them with an ampersand. 3 or more, include the first with et al. That's really the rule. The only other time you might come up against a tricky kind of author reference is if there is an organization. So usually you'll find this, it mostly happens around like websites where there's not one person or group of people that are attributed with authoring the content, but an organization is. And a way to tell who has actually authored the content is to scroll down to the very bottom of the web page and look at who has the copyright attribution. So, the little copyright C, it usually has an organization with that little copyright symbol. If an organization has copyright, it means that they own the content. That's the reason why we reference, is to ensure that we're not breaching any copyright. So for example, you can see here, we've got the World Health Organization written exactly as it appears. So I know that the obviously Australian spelling, we want to put an S for organization, but we do want to reflect exactly what the organization is called, even if it's got American spelling, and the date of publication. So that's absolutely fine to do. I know it can sometimes confuse students because they're like, there's no one person that's actually done this. Sometimes an organization has authored the content, and that's absolutely fine too. Again, it's usually around websites. So that's sort of the in-text citation side of things. But what about the reference list? So a reference list is a collection of full references that you've cited in your assignment that appear at the end of the assignment. So the way it works is everything that you have cited in text needs to appear in the reference list. Everything in your reference list needs to appear in text. I don't think there are any assignments at Endeavour that require a bibliography. A bibliography is essentially just a reference list that includes extra sources that haven't appeared in the direct citations in the assignment or in the work, but were sort of used as background research. Unless your assignment outline clearly states bibliography, you don't have to worry about that. Just whatever you've cited in text, including the reference list, and that's all you have to think about. So creating these references, there are a little bit more information that we need to include in our reference list entries than our in-text citations, but thankfully they all follow a pretty similar formula. That's what how I like to think about it. As referencing is sort of just a formula that you push the pieces of information that you need to capture into, and the like punctuation and semantics and stuff like that is the actual referencing style. So we start the same way with all of them, despite, it doesn't matter what kind of source you're using. We always start with the author and the year, which is exactly what we need for our in-text citations anyway. So it's a really great place to start, and sort of makes sense. If you were trying to find the original source, it makes sense to include the 2 key pieces of information that you need to find it in the reference list anyway. So we have authors, author or authors, they're starting with their surname, a comma, their first initial and a full stop, the year of publication in brackets and a full stop, This is the book reference. So for this, we want the title of the book in italics and sentence case. The book edition, if there is one. If it's a first edition, you don't have to worry about it. But if it's the second, third, fourth, fifth edition, we also include the edition statement, not in italics, in brackets after the book title, and then the publishing information. And this is an example of what that looks like with an actual book. So you can see here we've got author, surname, comma, first initial, full stop, date in brackets, full stop, title of the book in italics and sentence case, the edition statement in brackets with ed dot to just say edition, full stop, and then the publisher. And every single book follows exactly the same format. Obviously, the information will change because the authors, the date and title differ depending on the book, but they all follow exactly that same formula. This is an example, another example of a book. It looks a little bit more intimidating, but that's just because we have a couple more author names to include. If you look at it a little bit closer, you'll see that it is actually following exactly the same rules that we talked about in the previous slide. We have the author surname, a comma, the initials. So this is first initial, first name, and middle name with full stops and a comma. Surname, comma, initial, full stop, comma, surname, comma, initials, full stops, commas, surname, comma, so on and so on. And then between the second last and last author, we have an ampersand just to say, and this is the last author here. Then a comma, initials, full stops, the date of publication in brackets, then a full stop, the title of the book in italics and sentence case, the edition statement in not in italics, in brackets with ed dot, and then the publisher. So you can see here, I broke it down into like a little color coding. My brain just sort of likes to like see things visually. So once you sort of break down those elements, I like to think of them as like puzzle pieces. And all we're doing is collecting those puzzle pieces of information and pushing them together to create our reference list entry. And like I said, the full stops, commas, italicization, all of that, that's the actual referencing style. I'll also point out here that you can see these references have a hanging indent. So the first line is justified to the left, and then subsequent lines here are tabbed over one. And there is a way to just automatically apply that in Word, which I'll show you how to do at the end of the session. All reference lists are also listed in alphabetical order. So that's sort of just like the general formatting rules. And again, that's just another example of that broken down into those little like puzzle pieces of information. But you can see if you look a little closer, again, it's following exactly the same formatting as our previous book entry. With water because I'm a librarian and I usually don't talk this much. Okay, so what about ebooks? If you're using an ebook from the Endeavour library, nothing is different. It's exactly the same as referencing a print book. You don't have to worry about it. The only time it's different at all is if you're using a book that you found on the web. So for example, like a Google book, this is a Google book that I found here. We again follow exactly the same referencing style, author surname, comma, first initial, full stop, date in brackets, full stop, title of the book in italics and sentence case, full stop, and then the publisher. The only difference is we include a link to the book. So like I said, if you're using the library catalog and finding your textbooks through the library, like I have here, you don't have to change anything at all. It's exactly the same formatting as you would a print book. But if you are using a book from the web, just include the link. But that's sort of just like an extra rule. You probably won't come up against that often because you'll hopefully be using the books in the library. Referencing a journal article. I know this one looks really scary and overwhelming, but I promise you it's not that scary. The thing is with journal articles is they are, there's a little bit more information we need to capture. So if you think about it, journal articles are published at a much higher frequency than books. So to like differentiate between them, they include a little bit more information than books or websites. But if you look closer, you can see that this is exactly the same formatting at the start as the previous examples. We start with the author surname, the comma, and the first initials. If there are obviously more than one author, we include an ampersand between the last two authors. The year of publication in brackets. Then for journal articles, we have the title of the article in sentence case, but not in italics. The title of the journal the article was published in, a comma, and then the volume. This little section is all in italics. The issue in brackets, a comma, the page range, and then a DOI. You'll find more often than not that journal articles have this little number here. This is just called a digital object identifier. And it essentially just means that this number is specific to this journal article. Like I said, journal articles are published at a much higher frequency, so sometimes it's harder to find them. So this DOI is sort of like its special number that no other article has. So it is the easiest way to find this article again. And like I said previously, the purpose of referencing is to try and make it as easy to find the original source as possible. So we always include a DOI if there is one available. If there is not a DOI available and you're using the Endeavour library, you just don't include anything. I have an example on the next slide. But if you are using Google Scholar and there's no DOI, include a link to it. So that's sort of like the same rule as like the eBook rule. If you're using something outside of the library on the web, include a link to it. Otherwise, you don't have to worry about it. So I know this one looks pretty intense. You can see we've got our hanging indent here. But it's just because there's quite a few authors that we've captured. But again, we're following exactly the same formatting as our previous one. The author, a comma, the first initials, full stop, comma, and so on and so on. We have an ampersand between our second last and last authors. The date in brackets, a full stop. This is the title of the journal article. Then we have the title of the journal that this article was published in italics, the volume in italics, the issue in brackets, the page range, and then a DOI. Like I said, I know it looks very intense. This is just an example of what it would look like if you found it in the library and it didn't have a DOI. Again, you just don't include anything in this section here. But this is sort of that reference broken down into those puzzle pieces. So once we sort of break it apart, we can see, okay, this is just little pieces of information that we have to collect and pull together into this formatting, and that creates our reference. And like I said, the more that you do this, the easier it will become and the more intuitive that, adding in that punctuation where it needs to be added, that italicization where it needs to be added, it gets a lot easier. So last kind of source that I'm going to be covering before I move on to show you a little bit more practically how this would work is a website. Just like our last two references or reference styles, we start with the author surname, a comma, their initial, a full stop, the year of publication in brackets, and a full stop. In this one, we have the title of the web page in italics, the name of the site that we collected that the web page was situated, and a URL. So like I said, sometimes you'll find that particularly with websites, there isn't a single person that's been attributed to authoring the content, in which case we look at who has the copyright. And in this case, the government of West Australian Department of Health authored this content. So we include that as an organizational name, and that's absolutely fine to do. Also, sometimes with websites, you'll find that they actually don't have a last updated date or an edited date or published date. That's just sort of the nature of the web, and that's why it's obviously a lot better to use journal articles and books because it has their stronger sources. But if you are using a website and it doesn't have a date of publication, we include n.d. and that essentially just denotes no date. It's sort of like that et al. It's saying that, we did look, we did try, we aren't just missing a piece of information in the reference, but there was just no date for us to find. That was the case for this website. Then we have the title of the web page itself. In this case, the government of West Australian Department of Health was the same, like the website name was called that and the author was called that. So we only include it once. If this was hosted on a website with a different name, we would include it after the title. But in this case, we don't have to. And then a link to the source with that hanging indent as well. So that's sort of all of the usual kind of sources that you'll be using. Obviously, like I said, books and journal articles are stronger. But if you do use websites, this is the breakdown. And again, I've just sort of separated that out into those little puzzle pieces, so you can see sort of how they slot together. Before I move on, I'm just going to quickly touch on the kinds of sources that you should be using. Again, when you first get into studying, I know it's very overwhelming and you're not really sure where to look, what to do. The CRAAP test is a really good place to start to get you thinking critically about the sources that you're using. So obviously we want to be using scholarly peer-reviewed journal articles and books published by reputable agencies, and avoiding things like personal blogs and opinion sites and, clickbait and that kind of thing. Even if they're saying the same thing, for example, if you're looking at a website and it says that ginger is effective at treating nausea, but if that site is also selling like ginger tea, you can see that the purpose of that might not be the strongest, as opposed to finding a journal article where a study was conducted testing the effectiveness of ginger in morning sickness or something like that. And they conducted a study and did a trial and they did a test and then they actually generated results from it. Even though those two sources are saying the same thing, one is obviously much stronger than the other, because the purpose of it was obviously not to like sell things. Even one of the examples that I used in this presentation, this is a journal article. It is a scholarly peer-reviewed journal article. However, it was published in 1999, which means that it's probably, I can't believe it's 2023 now, quite out of date. So finding a more recent study would be much better. Usually the rule to follow is published in the last 10 years. That's usually a good way to sort of vet old and out-of-date studies, but sometimes you'll find assignments will give you like a specific date range and they'll be like, you have to find 3 articles published in the last 5 years or whatever. So check your assignment outlines, but just generally 10 years is the rule to remember. This is a slide on library resources. Rather than go through it, I'm just going to show you. This is the reference list for this presentation, so you can sort of see how it appears. We've got references up the top in bold. We have our references listed alphabetically, and you can see how that hanging indent looks as well. So that's sort of like the format of what this is supposed to look like. Right. I'm going to jump onto the library website and just give you a quick introduction on sort of how to start with your reference building. So I'm going to jump into this little link here that says databases. And I'm going to click into Discovery Search. Discovery Search is a really good place to start because it's a database that houses a lot of journal articles. It's the biggest database that the library subscribes to. So you have more of a chance of finding things in here. If you do need help with research, we do have a lot of little videos on how to use these databases, or you can also book a consultation with the library and we can take you through it. I'm going to jump into this. It will ask you to log in. This is your student number and your Office 365 or your LMS password. IT have made it the same across the board. Honestly, this is the hardest part. As long as you can like get through this. Oh, apparently I can't. Go. I had to update my password. Yes, please. It will take you to this little search engine here. We want to be very specific about the keywords we're using. This isn't like a Google search. What the database does is actually search every single word that is input into this box. So if I typed in, how does yoga impact depression, it would search the how, the does, all of that. And I'm connecting these two with A&D, which is telling the database, I want to find articles with this keyword and this keyword. You can get a lot more into how to search these, a little bit more sophisticated, like a more sophisticated search. But for now, just for the demonstration, I'm going to keep it very simple. Just going to speed run filtering things out. First thing I want to do is filter to full text. Get rid of all of the just abstracts and stuff. We only want stuff that has the full content. Next, I'm going to filter to scholarly peer-reviewed journals to increase the quality of the resources I'm finding. And then I'm going to just quickly do the last 10 years, which I can't believe last 10 years is 2013. And I'm going to also filter to academic journals. So you can see that EBSCO is pretty massive. It's a couple of magazines and reports and stuff in here too, and I don't want those. I just want academic journals. So you'll see even with that very, very simple search and very basic filtering, I still have over 10,000 articles that I can look at. This is too big. I would actually keep searching and filtering, but just for an example, I'm going to just have a look at these. Based on the title, I'm going to click in and have a look at this one. The reason I've had a look at this one is because it's a randomized control trial. Sorry, I just need a bit more water. Randomized control trials are often the authors conducting research. So if I scroll down and have a look at the abstract, I can see that they have decided they want to, they've come up with a question that they want to investigate. They found 84 participants and they conducted a randomized control trial, and then they generated results from it. So this is a primary journal article because you can see that the authors have asked the question, they've actually done the test, and then they've reported on it. It's as close to the original research as possible. So I definitely want to use this in my assignment if I'm doing it on this. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the right-hand side of the page and hit Cite. Obviously, I would actually click on the full text PDF and read the article before I got to this point. But this is really good to do as you're doing your research. I'm actually just going to open a Word document. Show you how you would place this into your assignment. So it's a really good idea to collect your references as you go. There's nothing more heartbreaking than getting to the very end of your assignment and realizing that all you have of your research is the author surname and date of publication and nothing else. I've had consultations like that before. We've essentially had to go back and re-research the whole assignment to find those articles again. So including a reference list at the end, like at the end of your paper, even if it's messy to start with, but collecting this information as you go is definitely the way to go. So I've scrolled down and I found APA 7. Then I'm just going to highlight that, control copy, I'm going to jump to my Word document and paste it in. You see it sort of like appears sort of gross. It's got this weird background happening. If you want, you can just click this little control paste option and select keep text only, and that will get rid of all that gross stuff. Or for whatever reason, if this doesn't appear, which sometimes it doesn't, I'm just going to go up to the top of my Word document here and find this little A with an eraser and hit that, and that will clear all the formatting from the website, that weird like gray background. So now we have the core pieces of information that we need. This, however, is not done and this isn't perfect. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go back to the library homepage, and then I'm going to click on referencing. And this is the referencing library website. This is so good. Our incredible librarian on the Brisbane campus, Nikita, built this all on her own from a laptop. I cannot believe she did this on a laptop. It is genuinely so good. It answers all of the referencing questions that you could possibly ask. We have more information on plagiarism. We have more information on how to paraphrase and how to direct quote. So like I said, you don't have to remember everything that I talked about. I know it's a lot and super overwhelming, but this is where you would come to find more support on that. So, you know, okay, how do I paraphrase again? And it gives you the examples. There's examples on direct quoting and examples on how to do your in-text citations too. So now I want to look at reference list entries. So I'm going to look on my left-hand sidebar here, find reference list, and I want to reference a journal article, and you can see that there's a whole list of things that you might need to reference. We've just covered the basics today, but if you're trying to reference a video or trying to reference a database or some legislation, there's information here. I'm going to click on journal article, and then we have the example up the top here. The next thing I'm going to do is just make sure that the content that I have in here matches the formatting that we have here. And that's essentially how best to sort of learn this. It's just to have a go, get stuck in, do your best. What you can always do is, just have a go, use the cite functions. A lot of times eBooks will have cite functions as well, so it can grab the key pieces of information that you need. Then have a go, look at the library website and see if you can get it up to the referencing standard. Then you can always book a consultation with a librarian and we can look through your references together. We can do Zoom sessions like this, or if you want to come to campus, we can do face-to-face. And you can literally bring in your laptop. We can look at your assignment, or you can screen share your assignment. We can go through the in-text referencing, the end-text referencing, and give you feedback like that. Because a lot of the time it is just, you need a comma here, you need to italicize this. This is supposed to be an ampersand symbol when you've put A and D. Really small things like that, that when you get started, there's so many rules, but the more and more that you practice, the easier it becomes. So the first thing I'm going to do is have a look at my authors, and I can see that it's following the format that I need. Amazing. Author, comma, initials, full stops, commas, etc., etc. We have our little ampersand here. I can see somebody coming down. Okay, cool. I wasn't sure if I had to sign for that package. I can see we've got a little ampersand here. We have our date of publication in brackets and a full stop. Then we have the title of the journal article. Looking at this example here, title of article, I can see that this, and this is an example here, this is in sentence case. So the capitalization is taken out. So I'm going to highlight this little title here. I'm going to go up to this option, change case, and change it to sentence case or lowercase. And then back to sentence case. There we go, cool. And you can see that that's taken out the capital letters of all of these words. The last thing I'm going to quickly fix up is the subtitle. This needs to be capitalized. So the beginning of the title and beginning of the subtitle are capitalized, and then obviously nouns and names and stuff like that are in capitals. But rather than having to go through and individually change all of the capitalization like I used to before I realized that this was a thing, you can just change case up the top. So that's now nice and correct. Next, I'm going to have a look at the title of the journal and the volume. Both need to be in italics. You can see here we've got the title of the journal and the volume in italics. I can also check to make sure that we have the full name of the publishing journal. Sometimes they'll be abbreviated, in which case you have to update it so it's the full title of the publishing journal. We also have a little bit of extra information here. I don't need to know that this is based in Washington, D.C. That's fine, so I'll just get rid of that. Add my comma, and I can see I've got my volume there. Control I, italicize that. Now that's looking correct. Then I'll check my issue and my page range. Issue is in brackets with a comma. Then we have page range, and neither of these are in italics. Okay. Issue in brackets, comma, page range. And then we have our DOI at the end, and this is a live link. So I'm just going to go to the end here, press space, and now it's available as a live link. The last thing I'm going to do is just fix the formatting. Normally I would sort of leave this, and then when I had like my full reference list at the end, I would highlight all of them and then go up to this paragraph option here. You can see this little box in the right-hand corner. Click that. And then this little section that says indentation, I'm going to go down to special. At the moment, we don't have any. I'm going to change it to hanging. I'm also going to fix up the spacing a little bit. And see that automatically includes that hanging indent and spaces it nicely. And that's the complete reference. So that's sort of the process of how to do it. Obviously, every single text that you use will be a little bit different, but that's the process. If I wanted to have a look at, okay, now I want to include an in-text reference, I'd go back to my referencing website, look at in-text citations. I can see here that I definitely have more than 3 authors. So I go in-text citations, 3 or more authors, hit that. And then this gives me an example of how to include that, my in-text citation. So again, we've got that et al rule. So for this example, what we would do, we start with a bracket, we take the author surname, check. There's no comma here, just et al, a full stop and a comma. And then the year of publication. Look at our year of publication, 2021. That's our in-text citation. So that's how to use that website. It's so, so helpful. And it is nice and easy to sort of like filter through that list. If you can't find the answer to your question in this live guide, we also have this document here. This is, I think, like 52 pages of referencing content. So everything that we couldn't fit on the website, we have in this PDF available here. This is the one that has that little table that I showed in the presentation. So this is like the in-text referencing examples. I literally just took it straight from here. It also has more examples on books, journal articles, et cetera, et cetera. If you can't find the answer in here, you can come to any page in the library. And then in the bottom right-hand corner here, we have our virtual librarian. If Gwyneth, who is our virtual librarian, is online, you can ask your referencing question on the chat. If she's away in a consultation or whatever, you can submit a ticket and then she'll get back to you. Or you can also reach out to one of your campus librarians, and you can also, on this right-hand side here, book a consultation if you would like help with referencing and a referencing check. So that's everything. I know it was a lot. Like I said, don't feel like you have to remember everything I said. Just know that this referencing website is here, and just start thinking about what is needed when you're doing your in-text citations and you're paraphrasing. Make sure that you're writing things in your own words and including in-text references as soon as a new piece of information or a new idea is discussed, and then reflect that reference in your reference list entries at the end. And that's really the starting point. So I'm going to finish the presentation now. I would also just like to add, at the beginning of this session, I did forget to do an acknowledgement of country, which I would like to do now. I'm so sorry. I really just got excited and jumped into it. So I would like to acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people and the land that I am presenting on today, paying deep respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Thank you so much for watching the recording or attending today. My name's Odette. I'm the Perth librarian. I assure you that all of the other librarians on the other campuses are just as knowledgeable and keen to help you with your referencing as I am. So please reach out to us if you do need a hand. So I'm going to stop the recording now, and good luck with your studies.